At full throttle, a 5.2-liter V10 screams to 8,700 revolutions per minute, and then you suddenly cut to silence. A gloved hand guiding a welding torch, a tiny pool of molten aluminum glowing white-hot as two panels become one. Voiceover: at Audi's Böllinger-Höfe factory, only 15 R8 supercars are built per day, and most of the work is still done entirely by hand. We open on that sound. The R8's V10 bouncing off a tunnel wall, a blur of Suzuka gray and Tango red, streaking past the camera, sparks flying as it downshifts. You feel the car in your chest more than you hear it. Hard cut, a pair of hands, slow and deliberate, tracing a weld bead across bare aluminum. You see the reflection of the arc in the visor, the concentration in the worker's posture, the tiny controlled movements it takes to keep the molten pool exactly where it needs to be. Everyone sees this, you say over a slow-motion shot of the R8 tearing down a straight, exhaust cracking on upshift, flames flickering from the tailpipes as it bangs through gears. Almost nobody sees this. We cut back to the workshop, a small team gathered around a raw body shell, checking seams, feeling surfaces with fingertips, adjusting clamps by fractions of a millimeter, occasionally stepping back to sight down a panel like a sculptor judging a statue. This is Böllinger-Höfe. Hidden in the German countryside near Heilbronn, this facility builds some of Audi's most extreme cars, and it does so at a pace that sounds almost ridiculous in the age of mass production. 15 Audi R8s per day. That's it. While other lines push hundreds or even thousands of cars, this one moves slowly, deliberately, like a watchmaker's bench stretched to the size of a factory. We intercut quick flashes, an R8 body shell on a carrier, a team meeting over digital plans, the e-tron GT gliding silently through the same hall, a GT4 race shell tucked in a corner. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going inside this building, walking the same line the R8 and the all-electric e-tron GT share, watching where robots do the heavy lifting and where humans still refuse to let go of the tools. And by the end, you'll understand why the R8 is not just another fast car, it's one of the last genuinely hand-finished supercars left on the road. You add one more tease, and there's a twist. In these same walls, Audi also builds race cars that share most of their DNA with the road car you can park in your garage. So when you hear that V10 on the street, you're hearing echoes of a GT4 machine tuned for the Nürburgring. Camera pulls back into a drone shot. A modern, clean complex set among fields and trees, the morning sun reflecting off glass and metal. Böllinger-Höfe sits just outside Heilbronn near Audi's Neckarsulm plant. It's not huge by auto industry standards, around 40,000 square meters. But inside, up to 1,000 highly qualified employees are focused on one thing: building cars that don't just match a blueprint, they live up to an idea. We walk through the entrance into bright, organized halls. No chaotic noise, no frantic pace. The line moves slowly, cars spaced far apart, each at its own station, like separate projects rather than anonymous units. You see whiteboards with handwritten notes next to digital monitors, suggesting that decisions here are still partly human, not just algorithmic. This facility opened in 2014. From day one, it wasn't designed to be a volume factory. It was designed as a kind of manufactory, a bridge between artisan workshop and high-tech production line. Here, Audi's R8 supercar and the all-electric e-tron GT both come to life. Two completely different kinds of performance, built under one roof. You pan across workstations, people checking carbon fiber parts under bright inspection lights, others working at aluminum welding bays, a team hand-finishing interior trims with tiny tools and brushes. Another worker is programming a torque gun while glancing at a printed checklist with their own annotations. When you hear 1,000 employees, you might imagine an army of people feeding parts into machines. But what stands out here is specialization. Many of these people have spent years working on nothing but one step of the process: aligning a body shell, tuning a suspension, perfecting a weld pattern. It's repetition, but at a very high level. You walk alongside the conveyor. R8 shells and e-tron. GT shells are spaced like pearls on a string. The pace here is slower by design. Because they only build around 15 R8s each day, there's time. Time to adjust a panel until it's perfect. Time to run your palm along an aluminum surface and feel for tiny imperfections. Time to treat the car less like a commodity and more like an individual project. We see small details that give away the mindset. Racks of custom tools laid out neatly, checklists signed by hand, notes taped to jigs with minor adjustments written from experience. A worker marks something in pencil directly on a jig, then later that change appears on the digital model, a sign that the line learns from the people, not just the other way around. You won't see massive stockpiles of body shells here. Cars move in small batches. Each one is scanned, checked, and logged. This isn't just about building fast, it's about building consistently, with a level of attention that makes sense when your product is a six-figure supercar or a high-end electric grand tourer. As you pass through different areas, you emphasize the contrast with a conventional plant. In a typical mass production factory, efficiency is measured in seconds shaved off each step. Here, efficiency means something slightly different. It's about building something so precisely that you don't have to fix it later. It's about doing 100 small things right the first time so that the car leaves this building feeling tight, solid, and special. A quick moment with one of the workers. You see a name embroidered on a uniform, a small R8 logo pin on the chest. Talk to the people here and you notice something else. Pride. They know where their cars end up. On tracks, on YouTube, on posters in kids' bedrooms. There's a sense that they're working on a future classic, not just next year's fleet car. Audi calls it a two-way framer. It's a single large fastening system, but each body passes through it twice. On its first pass, the internal side parts of the body are positioned and fixed. On the second pass, the outer panels are attached. We see a body shell rolling into the framer. Clamps swing in from all directions. Locating points lock into place with a satisfying thunk, and 10 robots around the structure begin their work in a choreographed sequence. 10 robots surround the car, each with access to a library of 32 different tools. They're not just repeating one motion endlessly. They switch tools, adjust angles, and handle a huge variety of joining and fixing operations, spot welds, adhesive applications, rivets, and more. Think of them as a team of specialists rather than a row of identical arms. You zoom in on the robotic wrists swapping tools, welding guns traded for grippers, then for sealant nozzles, then for measuring probes. The point of the two-way framer is precision and flexibility, because the R8 is a mid-engine aluminum space frame and the e-tron GT is a four-door electric platform with a different architecture. They have very different geometries and structures. But this single framer can handle both. That's incredibly rare. Across the entire VW group, with all its brands and factories, having two such different cars on one line using the same framing system is basically unique. As a body passes through its first cycle, you explain. On the first pass, internal side sections are locked in place. This sets the car's basic geometry, the shape that everything else will reference. If the skeleton is off here, everything downstream suffers. On the second pass, external panels are added and fixed. This is where gaps, fit, and the visible surfaces get dialed in. It's like the difference between building the bones and then adding the skin. Between these cycles, operators step in. One uses a digital arm to measure reference points, watching numbers change on a screen. Another checks a critical weld visually and with a gauge. Even as the robots move smoothly, there are deliberate pauses built into this line. After the robots finish, the body is often checked by human eyes and hands. Measurements are taken, edges are verified, surfaces are inspected under special lighting. The machines get it close, the humans make it perfect. You contrast this with a mass production line. In a typical high-volume plant, you wouldn't have this much time or flexibility. The line is optimized for one or maybe two closely related models. Here, the body line has been engineered as a kind of universal stage where a hand-built supercar and a high-tech EV can both take shape without stepping on each other's toes. We see both an R8 and an e-tron GT body shell near each other on different carriers. One is built around a naturally aspirated V10 and a mid-engine layout with big air intakes and specific crash structures for that driveline. The other is built to carry heavy battery packs and electric motors with different load paths engineered into the floor and sills. Yet they're both going through the same halo of robots, the same two-way framer supported by the same team. That mix of shared process and unique character is what makes Bullinger Huffa so fascinating. You add a moment of human detail. One operator gives a light tap on a panel after the cycle, listening to the sound it makes, then nods. Watch the operators for a second. They're not just monitoring screens, they're listening to the sounds the equipment makes. They're watching how panels sit in jigs, and if something doesn't look quite right, they hit pause. In a world where everything is supposed to be automated, this factory still allows for human judgment in the middle of high-tech processes. Now we move into the manual stations. The tone shifts. Fewer robots. More people. More sparks in small self-contained booths. More quiet conversation between specialists. For all that high-tech choreography, some of the most important work here doesn't come from a robot. It comes from hands. We watch a worker performing fusion welding on an aluminum seam. No automation, just skill and muscle memory. The helmet drops, the arc lights, and the world narrows to a tiny glowing pool. This is fusion welding done by hand on the R8's aluminum structure. It's slow, it's hot, and it takes serious experience. You're not just joining metal, you're shaping how force travels through the car when you hit a bump at 300 kilometers per hour. You're deciding how that V10's vibrations feel in the cabin, how solid the car feels when you throw it into a fast corner. You highlight the steadiness of the welder's hand, the rhythm. Melt, move, melt, move. Tiny circles, perfectly overlapping. These welders aren't just machine operators. Many of them came up through trades where touch matters: metalwork, fabrication, even carpentry. In fact, Audi points out that there's a qualified carpenter on the team here, not because they need someone to build furniture, but because a carpenter is trained to have an exceptional sensitivity to surfaces and edges. That ability to feel tiny imperfections is priceless when you're finishing aluminum and composite bodywork. We watch that carpenter-turned-body specialist run a bare hand across an R8's side panel, eyes half closed, searching for a ripple you can't see on camera. They stop, mark a spot with a small piece of tape, and gently work it with a block until it's right. Then they step back and look at how light flows across the panel from different angles. This is the kind of detail you'll never notice in a spec sheet. But when you see an R8 in person and the surfaces look like they've been poured rather than stamped, this is why. Someone literally felt that panel and decided it could be better. You move down the line and show manual finishing tools, sanding blocks, small files, precision gauges, handheld lamps pointed obliquely to reveal waves, even simple wooden blocks wrapped in abrasive. Here, the car is not just welded, it's sculpted. Edges are broken just enough so they don't catch light harshly. Weld seams are smoothed but not erased to the point of weakness. Every adjustment is intentional, based on a mix of measuring instruments and years of experience. You emphasize the relationship between worker and car. It's not unusual for the same technician to see their car multiple times at different stations. They remember a chassis number, they remember a color, they remember that this one needed a little extra attention in one area. That continuity is something you lose when production gets too big. We see workers adjusting doors, aligning panels, checking gaps with small feeler tools, closing doors repeatedly to make sure they latch with the right resistance. Okay, let's be honest, when you spend this kind of money on a supercar, you expect the doors to close with a specific kind of sound. That tight engineered thunk that feels like a bank vault crossed with a race car. Getting that comes down to tiny adjustments in hinges, latches, seals, many of which are done by hand by people who've done this hundreds of times and can hear when it's right. You tie it back to the opening hook. Remember the V10 scream you heard at the start? That ferocity, that raw speed, has to be housed in something solid. This is where that happens. These welders and finishers are building the cage that keeps you safe when you're flat out on a track or blasting down the Autobahn. Every bead, every pass, every measured tap of a hammer is part of that. Now we step back and look at the bigger picture of the line itself. We see an R8 shell moving down the conveyor next to an e-tron GT a few stations behind, both on their own carriers, both in different stages of dress, one with open engine bay space in the middle, the other with a flat floor ready for batteries. This is the part that still blows production engineers' minds. On this single line, you can watch a mid-engine, naturally aspirated V10 supercar and a four-door all-electric Grand Tourer move side by side. You pause on that. Most car factories are specialists. A line will build versions of the same platform, sedan, wagon, maybe an SUV cousin. Here, you've got a car built around a 5.2-liter engine and a dual-clutch gearbox, sharing space with a car designed around battery packs and electric motors. One car breathes through intake trumpets, the other hums quietly on electrons, and yet they both get the same level of care. A production manager's line is paraphrased, manufacturing two vehicles that are so technologically different on one assembly line is unique across their entire group. That's not marketing fluff. It's a real logistical achievement. It means every station, every robot, every hoist, and every human has to be able to deal with both architectures without mixing them up. You can't treat an e-tron GT like a stretched R8. They're cousins at best, but here they're raised in the same household. We show quick cuts. At one station, a rear subframe for the R8 being prepared, mounts for the mid-mounted V10 and rear axle, space for the exhaust routing, cooling lines for the engine. At another, in the same hall, a skateboard-style assembly for the e-tron GT with battery integration, underbody shielding, and electric drive modules. In one spot, you've got engine mounts and exhaust systems. In another, high-voltage connectors and cooling lines for battery packs. And yet, from above, it all looks like one coordinated ballet. You describe how the line is sequenced. Bodies are tagged and tracked from the moment they enter the line. When a station sees an R8 coming, tools, parts, and torque settings adapt automatically. Screens show R8 specific instructions, workers grab the right brackets, the right fasteners. When it sees an e-tron GT, the same thing happens with a different set of parameters. For the workers, that means 1 minute you're centering a big V10 cradle, the next you're dealing with the routing of high-voltage cables and ensuring insulation is perfect. We come back to the line, watching an R8 at the final stations, paint gleaming under inspection lights, wheels going on, badges applied with careful hands, protective films being peeled away. So what do you actually get when you buy an Audi R8 built at Bellingerhofe? It's not just 0 to 100 in 3.1 seconds. It's not just a 331 kilometers per hour top speed or 620 horsepower on a spec sheet. You slow down the narration, lean into the emotion. You get a car built in a factory that chooses quality over volume. A car whose body was aligned in a unique two-way framer, whose welds were laid down by humans watching the puddle, not just by programs, whose door gaps were adjusted by feel as much as by measurement. You get something that, in an increasingly digital automated world, still carries the fingerprints, figuratively and literally, of the people who built it. You show one of the last R8s coming off the line, workforce gathered around, maybe even a small celebration as it rolls through a banner or under a sign. A couple of workers snap photos on their phones. The R8 is nearing the end of its life. The world is moving toward electric performance, and cars like the e-tron GT, also born here, are pointing to that future. That makes the R8 something special. One of the last hand-finished, naturally aspirated V10 supercars you can buy from a major manufacturer. Then the split screen returns. On one side, the car flat out on a track. On the other, a welder, a carpenter, a line worker torquing a bolt to a precise value, a test driver noting down a small adjustment. When you hear that V10 scream, you're not just hearing engineering, you're hearing the work of about 1,000 people in a 40,000 square meter building in Germany who still believe that at this level, some things are worth doing by hand. You end with a final dynamic shot. Sunset. The R8 fires up in the factory yard one last time, tail lights glowing, exhaust barking off the walls. It rolls out through a gate onto a small road that winds away through fields and disappears into the distance as the sound fades and the screen slowly darkens. Now that you've seen what goes into building a hand-finished supercar like the R8, I want to hear from you. Is this the kind of car we'll look back on in 20 years as the end of an era? Or do you think there's still room for high-revving engines in a mostly electric world? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this inside look at Audi's Bullinger-Hufe factory and the final assembly line of the R8, hit like so more car enthusiasts can discover it, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into how iconic machines are really built, and share this video with someone who still thinks modern cars are just made by robots. Because here, at least, that couldn't be further from the truth.